There are reports this morning from a leaked document that Glasgow City Council are considering cutting 800 teaching posts. The General Secretary of the SSTA Teachers Trade Union said this would potentially write off the current generation of young people. So was the First Minister aware that an SNP-run council was considering such a drastic cut in teacher numbers?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, this of course is that time of year when we get lots of reports about savings options that different councils are considering, and opposition parties quite understandably make hay with that, but very often these proposals do not proceed. And I think the official report of this Parliament will be littered with examples of what I've just spoken about. In terms of these particular proposals, I've not seen the detail of these. Councils, of course, are autonomous in their areas of responsibility, something that parties across this chamber often call on the Scottish Government to respect. But as my record shows, and indeed as my government's funding to councils demonstrates, I am in favour of more teachers, not fewer teachers.
Douglas Ross.
Well, the First Minister's record is 900 fewer teachers in Scotland, so I'm not sure how her rhetoric matches her record. And she's saying, I'm standing here making hay. No, I'm not. I'm deeply worried that one of the biggest councils in Scotland is considering 800 teachers being lost. If Glasgow City Council went ahead with that, it would reduce school staff by 15%. 1 in 7 teachers in Glasgow would be lost. And we've heard reports that SNP-run East Ayrshire Council is also considering cutting teachers. East Renfrewshire is contemplating very serious cuts to education. This is what happens when the SNP don't properly fund councils. It wastes taxpayers' money on ferries that don't float and other pet projects instead of providing Scottish education and Scottish schools with the support they need. So will the First Minister tell us, if she's listening to the questions, will the First Minister tell us, as a result of her budget choices and costly mistakes, how many teachers are going to lose their jobs in Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, I'll come on to my government's budget choices in a moment, but let me issue, with the greatest respect to Douglas Ross, I'll answer the questions.
Let's hear the First Minister, please.
And I'll answer the questions fully. But firstly, on the general issue, I know, and we've seen this week, that Douglas Ross favours riding roughshod over the decisions and powers of democratically elected institutions. I, on the other hand,
thank you.
Respect the autonomy of democratically elected institutions. But to come to budget choices, let me set out the budget choices of this government. In this financial year, 2022-23, this government provided £145 million of additional funding to local authorities to employ up to 2,400 more teachers and 500 more classroom assistants. That funding, of course, is being protected in the budget that we have put forward for the next financial year. And of course, overall, we are increasing the resources available to councils by over £570 million. That's a real terms increase of £160.6 million. So there's the budget choices of this government, Presiding Officer. Had we followed the advice, of course, of the Conservatives, we wouldn't be able to do all of that because we'd have cut taxes for the very richest people in the country.
Douglas Ross.
So first I asked Nicola Sturgeon about 800 teacher losses potentially happening in Glasgow. No answer. The next question was how many teachers fear losing their jobs across Scotland as a result of her government's budget. No answer again. And there are 900 fewer teachers in Scotland since Nicola Sturgeon's government came to power. That is the reality. But let's just look at quotes about the First Minister's budget. This is from SNP councillor Shona Morrison, the leader of the council umbrella group COSLA. SNP councillor Shona Morrison said this: "The reality of this situation is that, yet again, the essential services councils deliver has not been prioritised by the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government. That is the reality that councils and councillors, including SNP councillors, are facing across Scotland. But let's remember, more than 6 years ago, Nicola Sturgeon made bold promises about education, that it would be her #1 priority. She claimed her government would close the attainment gap completely. But yesterday, her own Education Secretary rubbished Nicola Sturgeon's promise. Shirley-Anne Somerville said, and this is a quote, "I think in reality that is exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to achieve, to get to the point of zero." So is the Education Secretary right that the First Minister's key promise is never going to happen?
First Minister.
Our commitment to substantially eliminate the poverty-related attainment gap by 2026 still stands. I've said that in the Parliament before, and I say it again today. Although, let me stress that phrase, poverty-related attainment gap. Of course, we are also trying to tackle child poverty through something that I think Douglas Ross might have referred to as a pet project earlier on, the Scottish Child Payment, for example. And that task of tackling child poverty and helping reduce and substantially eliminate the poverty-related attainment gap wouldn't be as difficult as it is if we didn't have a Tory government pushing more children into poverty every single week. Let's come back, Presiding Officer, to teachers. The number of primary teachers in our schools is amongst the highest today than at any time since I was at primary school. The overall teacher-pupil ratio is the lowest in the UK. And in Scotland, right now, there are 7,573 teachers per 100,000 pupils. That compares to just 5,734 where the Conservatives are in government in England. And of course, as I said, we're providing £145 million to councils to support additional teachers. So that's our funding choices, that's our record, and I am proud to stand on it.
Douglas Ross.
Nicola Sturgeon is proud to see SNP councils considering cutting teacher numbers. You're proud of that, First Minister. You should be embarrassed, if not disgraced. Nicola Sturgeon said, "Judge me on education." Well, the Education Secretary has done exactly that and found that the First Minister makes promises her government won't meet. Her failures have left teachers frustrated, disappointed and angry. Today, schools in North Lanarkshire and Moray are on strike. Tomorrow, it's Angus and Eastern Bartonshire. Next week, schools in another 10 council areas go on strike, including here in Edinburgh. The following week, another 10 are striking from Borders to Aberdeenshire. After years of disrupted education because of the COVID pandemic, when the Scottish Government was too quick to shut down schools and limit teaching time, pupils are once again getting a raw deal. All of this affects young people's opportunities and causes real problems for parents. So can the First Minister tell young people and Scottish families, will education ever be her #1 priority?
First Minister.
Well, I'll let the people of Scotland continue to judge the record and the actions and the decisions of this government. Let me repeat some of that. At a time when the Tories have been slashing budgets for local councils, this government, in the budget we have put forward for next year, is increasing council budgets by over £570 million. We are providing £145 million to councils to support the employment of additional teachers. Again, let me repeat, something we would not have been able to do had we followed Douglas Ross's advice and cut taxes for the highest paid. Instead, we are asking those at the top of the income spectrum in Scotland to pay a little bit more to protect our public services. And in terms of pay dispute with teachers, this is a government that continues to negotiate and to seek settlement. Again, that stands in marked contrast to where the Conservatives are in power, where the Education Secretary in England said this week that we didn't negotiate pay with teachers because
Briefly,
that
First
is not
Minister.
what the government is here to do. The Tories, of course, are trying to take away the right to strike of public sector workers. We will continue to seek fair pay deals in the NHS, in the teaching profession and elsewhere across our public sector. We will continue to take decisions that prioritise education, that prioritise health, in stark contrast to anything and everything the Scottish Conservatives do.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.